All right, everybody, we have our interview ready. We have Kevin Oestreicher from the Locked On Ravens podcast and also a contributor on the Ravens Wire. How are you doing, Kevin?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Not too bad. We're happy to have you on. We were kind of just talking right before we started recording. We wanted to get you on for our Fuck, Marry, Kill section, but it just didn't line up that way, but we're still happy to have you on. So thanks for taking the time. Let's just start off with the question that everybody of our listeners is going to want to know, and that is, with me being a Jags fan, how does it feel to just basically steal Calais Campbell?
Oh, man. Well, it feels great. Not necessarily the stealing part, but I think that feels a little good also. I feel like when you trade a 5th-round pick for a guy like Calais Campbell, who, not only a great player, as everybody knows, but really an even better person. You look at him, Walter Payton, Man of the Year, and, 33 years old right now, but still plays in an exceptionally high level on the football field. And you look at what the Ravens wanted. I mean, everybody looks back at that Tennessee game where Derrick Henry runs all over the Ravens, and you see them just getting gashed up the middle. They couldn't generate interior pressure throughout the entire season. Calais Campbell, 6.5 sacks in 2019, but before that, in the 2017 and 2018 seasons for the Jaguars, 14.5 and then 10.5 sacks. So in 3 years for Jacksonville, 31.5 sacks, plus the pressure, the veteran leadership. I mean, only giving up a 5th-round pick for him is kind of just that sweetener on that deal. So I think that pairing him with Williams, who moves back to nose tackle, Derek Wolfe, who they add in place of Michael Brockers, that deal falls through. Their interior is looking mighty stout right now.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And Calais, he didn't get the sack totals last year, but the pressures were still there. He was still rated one of the top defensive ends in football. He has been for the last 3 years. I'll stick to it. In 2017, he should have won Defensive Player of the Year over Aaron Donald. Like, Calais Campbell is a stud. I was sad to see him leave, but at the same time, Jags aren't going anywhere, so with him that late in his career, I was happy to see him go to a contender. One thing that maybe some of your listeners don't know is, like, I was a huge Ravens guy last year. Austin, the co-host here, loved to give me a lot of shit last year when I said that the Ravens were going to be one of the top teams in the league. So I love that Lamar Jackson stepped up because we got in a very huge battle over that. So that was awesome to see. Let's just go on to something that you talked about on your last podcast, actually, and that's the Marquise Brown and Miles Boykin. You and I both like Miles Boykin, think that he could have a big breakout year. So what are your thoughts on how is this wide receiver room going to play out for the Ravens?
Well, it's very young. You look at Marquise Brown and Miles Boykin, the two you mentioned, and I think the Ravens are relying on those two to make huge jumps. In 2020, the Ravens didn't go out and, sign a stud wide receiver, Robbie Anderson, Emmanuel Sanders, Amari Cooper. They haven't brought in Antonio Brown, and whether that's, because of their policy on domestic violence and the off-field issues, there's that. But, they have his cousin in Marquise Brown, and, the videos of him and Lamar Jackson, Antonio Brown, Jerry Jeudy working out together in Florida. Marquise Brown has taken it upon himself to get better. He was only playing, he said, around 70% last season because he had a screw in his foot, suffered a pretty brutal foot injury, and really didn't play up to his full potential. Still put up 46 receptions for 584 yards and 7 scores. Had very good deep line speed, was able to run slants very well as well. He's actually a very polished route runner. People don't give him enough credit for that. And, he only stands at 5'9". He's 170 pounds. That's pretty light, but he played actually under that total in 2019. So when you go and you look at him and then Miles Boykin next to him, Boykin and Lamar Jackson, I don't think were ever on the same page last season. I talked about that a lot. Only 13 receptions for 198 yards and 3 touchdowns. But, he's 6'4", he's 220 pounds. And I think the Ravens have a lot of trust in him because, again, I mentioned they didn't go out and draft CeeDee Lamb or Jerry Jeudy in the first round and trade up for one of those guys. They want Miles Boykin to be that guy for them. They develop, and he becomes that stud. He has a very high catch radius. He's a beast in the red zone as well. I believe 3 targets in the red zone, 3 touchdowns. So he's a red zone weapon. And him and Marquise Brown complement each other very well. And then you talk about drafting Devin Duvernay and James Prochet. You have Willie Snead on the roster as kind of that veteran leader. And the 2 oldest guys on the roster in the receiver room right now are Snead and DeAnthony Thomas. Both are 27 years old. So it's a pretty young, youthful group. But I think with that comes a lot of potential and potential breakouts as well.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So you brought up Devin Duvernay and James Prochet. So Austin and I saw them at the Senior Bowl, and we were both very impressed by both of them. Austin's a Texas fan, so he obviously has known Duvernay, but we were very impressed by Prochet and just his ability just on practices, just on punt return alone was catching everybody's eye. His quickness and being able to catch it like on the run and whatnot. I think that he has a real potential to make a difference in special teams for you guys.
Yeah, I think so too. And the Ravens haven't really, had that guy at punt returner, kick returner ever since Jacoby Jones left. They've tried to go and fill out the roster and that hole in particular. They tried Devin Hester as a veteran guy. They've tried drafting a few guys as well. It hasn't worked out with Duvernay. You have somebody you can place back at a punt return position like that. But also on the field, he's a slot guy. He has terrific speed and hands. And I mean, literally barely drops anything. And I think that's what the Ravens want. They've had these veteran receivers come in over the years. I'll mention Michael Crabtree as somebody who had those drop issues. It actually cost them a game against the Cleveland Browns back in 2018. I think the Ravens want guys, and then you talk about, James Prochet as well, who won't drop the football, who are sure-handed targets for Lamar Jackson, and extend those throwing windows because there's no secret Lamar Jackson had a historic season in 2019. If you want him to take that step up in 2020, not only does he have to improve on his skills, but I think the receivers you place around him have to make him better as well. And so maybe the stats won't be as gaudy next year for Lamar Jackson, but I think he'll get a lot more efficient as a passer because of guys like Duvernay and Prochet on the roster.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, kind of going right into that, I want to talk about Greg Roman and his scheme a little bit. What do you think is the difference is going to be this year compared to last year, now that everybody kind of knows what the Ravens are going to be doing? Obviously, it's hard. It's much easier to say stop the run of Lamar Jackson than it is. Like, it's a lot easier to say it than do it. But what other differences do you think that Greg Roman's going to bring?
I think Roman's going to want to have Lamar Jackson throw the football a bit more. And I think with that, I think Lamar Jackson's improvement comes back up because, Lamar Jackson was actually one of the best pocket passers in the league in 2019, which a lot of people don't give him credit for. When you go and look at his throwing on the run, that's an area of his game where he has made plays but could still stand to improve. When you look at the Ravens offense, it's like their scheme, there are so many different plays they can run out of the same look. So you can have them in the pistol formation, and three different things can happen. You can have, say it's Lamar Jackson and Mark Ingram. Lamar Jackson can put the ball in Ingram's belly, and Mark Ingram can take it. He'll run it up the middle. Lamar Jackson could also put the ball in Mark Ingram's belly and pull it back and run around, and that's the same exact look. He could also put the ball in the belly, throw it, pull it back and throw the football. That's three different looks, three very different plays with the same look. So with Roman, it's about keeping that continuity the same in terms of making everything look the same. And that, in turn, requires the defense to be extremely disciplined, especially those edge guys. When you talk about, for the Ravens, it would be Pernell McPhee or Matthew Judon, setting the edge, not crashing, not being overly, adept to the run plays and being faked out by that. But overall, I think Roman's going to want to throw this football a little bit more and be able to kind of mix it up with teams. Get the Ravens in field goal position. I think that's going to be his primary concern, as it has been, ever since coming to Baltimore, even before it was the offensive coordinator. I think he saw what Marty Mornhinweg was doing and kind of wanted to build that system around Lamar Jackson, and that has really made Lamar Jackson be the player he is because he's in a system that fits him. He has receivers that fit him, the tight ends, they fit him. And I think just going into 2020, it's about staying the same, but also tweaking things just a tiny bit to keep the defenses on their toes.
Yeah, I actually totally agree with that. So, all right. So speaking of the offense, you guys now have whatever you want to call it, 4 or 5-headed monster in the backfield. If you want to add Lamar Jackson to that or not. So you guys, first off, at pick 55, I believe it was, with J.K. Dobbins, just a complete steal. He was my running back 1, so I loved getting that. You obviously already had Ingram. I know that you personally love Edwards, so that's awesome. Justice Hill, I think, is one of the best athletes in the game right now and just hasn't gotten the opportunity with him being a rookie last year. And then Jackson. So I know that they've brought up and said that they wanted to do the 4-headed monster. If that's a reality or not, who knows? Four people running the ball is a lot. I don't know if you can ever get a running back into a groove or not. So how do you see this backfield kind of playing out in 2020 and 2021?
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting because, you mentioned it can sometimes be tough to get a running back in a groove if he's, not getting 15, 20 carries, 25 even a game. And with Mark Ingram, you have somebody who really just seamlessly fit into this Baltimore, not only on the field, but in the locker room, the Baltimore locker room. So then you bring in J.K. Dobbins. And I think J.K. Dobbins for Baltimore, he's the future. And I think, if I could have had it my way, maybe I would have taken somebody else and then had Gus Edwards kind of be that guy for Baltimore, because I think that he's eventually going to leave because the carries aren't there for him. He's had over 5 yards a carry in each of the past 2 years for Baltimore, the 2 years he's been in the NFL. And then you mentioned Justice Hill. Those are 4 quality running backs. Now, Mark Ingram does have a $6 million cap hit for next year. So eventually, if the season rolls along and rolls on and Mark Ingram, the production either dips or he gets injured, maybe the Ravens try to restructure that deal or maybe cut him all together and save a little bit of money that goes toward Ronnie Stanley or Marlon Humphrey or even, way towards in the future with Lamar Jackson. But you have to see that I think J.K. Dobbins is ultimately going to be the future for the Ravens. You look at Gus Edwards. He's on a 1-year deal right now. He signed his exclusive rights tender for them. And I think this is going to be his last year because there's no way that this guy is not a starter in the NFL for any team. And I just want him and, players who deserve opportunities to get those opportunities. With Justice Hill, I think it'd be premature for them to give up on a guy who they selected in the 4th round so early, especially, just a few years back. But I mean, with the depth on this roster, there might be some sacrifices that have to be made. Maybe Edwards is traded in a preseason deal. Maybe it's Hill who's the odd man out. But for Baltimore, if they do stay true to what they want with this 4-headed monster at running back, and you mentioned 5 if you maybe want to include Lamar Jackson in there potentially, I think that it's going to be difficult to give all the running backs the carries necessary to, really get into that groove. And then looking to 2021, I think that's the year the J.K. Dobbins takeover really begins.
Yeah, that's awesome. So the schedules obviously came out a couple weeks ago. What's your initial thoughts on the schedule so far?
The schedule for Baltimore, I think it's the way it played out was very good for them. I think having 5 primetime games, it's going to challenge this team, and I think that's what they need. Obviously going and playing Kansas City or Kansas City coming to Baltimore. It's going to be interesting to see how Baltimore reacts to having 2 Thursday night games in a row. The Ravens have the easiest strength of schedule, when looking at 2019 record. Now, obviously, that's because Cincinnati's on their schedule twice and they had the worst record in the league. You play the whole NFC East, which didn't have the best year themselves. But when you look at the Ravens and their schedule, they made a habit a few years ago of playing down to opponents. And I think that gave them, at least their records, some blemishes that shouldn't have been there. When you look at 2019, they were able to blow out teams they were supposed to blow out, and then the tough games came against, quality opponents. Now, Cleveland, that probably should have been a game you won in week 4. But this year, you go and the end of that schedule, you play the Bengals, and you play the Giants, and you play the Jaguars. People will say, oh, man, that's an easy 3-0. Well, you can't take any opponent lightly when you talk about the NFL because they're all professional football players. Maybe these teams are tired of tanking. Maybe Jacksonville, at this point is whatever it is, they've lost 10 straight games and they just want to win. If the Ravens are cruising into, a first round bye or playoff seeding, that could potentially be a trap game for Baltimore. You look at Cleveland, is Cleveland finally going to get over that hump? Ben Roethlisberger coming back for the Ravens, is that going to cause them trouble? Baltimore has an easy schedule in terms of 2019 strength of schedule. But again, nothing's taken for granted in this league. The Ravens, I think, don't have to travel a bunch. I think they travel the least throughout any team in the entire league. So that's going to help them quite a bit after having that grueling West Coast schedule last year. So overall, I think Baltimore has a pretty good schedule for the ability to go, get well rested, and be able to perform week in and week out.
Yeah. I don't want to put you on the spot. Do you have any sort of prediction on win-loss record?
Well, I've stuck with it. I say 15-1. I'll explain to you why. I believe that for Baltimore, this year is the year that they either go to the Super Bowl or win it. I'm pretty confident in their ability to do that. And the reason I say that is because you look at the additions they made. Baltimore got stronger on the interior of their defensive line, as we talked about a little bit earlier. Calais Campbell, Derek Wolfe, Brandon Williams gets to move back to nose tackle where Michael Pierce was playing and kind of created that logjam. I think with that pass rush plus the secondary with Marlon Humphrey, Jimmy Smith, Marcus Peters. You have Earl Thomas and Chuck Clark in the secondary. I mentioned Lamar Jackson might not have, as gaudy of a stat line as he did in 2019, but that doesn't mean that he's not going to have a worse season. I think that he'll be more efficient with the football. He'll be smarter with the football. And in turn, the Ravens don't have to go and blow out teams 45-6 like they did the Rams on Monday Night Football. If they beat them by 3 points, a win's a win. If they beat them by, 10 points, a win's a win. And for Baltimore, I don't necessarily think we're going to see those blowout losses come as much in 2020 just because of the fact that maybe the defenses get a little bit better. Maybe the Ravens feel the loss of Marshall Yanda a little bit, and that, creates a hole for Lamar Jackson. But I think this defense is perfectly set up to complement the offense. This is a defense that can hold leads when it's necessary. And if the offense is struggling to put points on the board like it was happening against the Tennessee Titans in the playoffs when it really mattered, then the defense, I think, last season wasn't probably built to contain Derrick Henry. This defense is built to stop the run, to rush the passer, and to cover very tightly. So I think that compared with, the Ravens defense of 2019, it's eons better. And then you talk about the offense, which really didn't lose a ton of starters outside of Marshall Yanda, and then Hayden Hurst you put in there as well. I think it goes hand in hand with the success they'll have.
I like it. 15-1. That's bold, and I'm all for it. So who do you think that loss is to then?
I actually have it as Cleveland in week 1. And the reason I say that is because I think the Ravens have played, throughout the last few years and throughout their entire history, really, as the underdog, somebody who is not given enough credit. And then, every year they seem to outperform expectations or at least get right there. And then they kind of play from the shadows. That was a very different feeling for Baltimore last season, and the feeling I'm talking about is being the ones that are not the hunters, but the hunted. Baltimore obviously goes and blows out Miami in week 1, comes back and beats Arizona in week 2. And, then it's the 2-2, but then you go and win 12 straight games, obviously establishing themselves as one of the powerhouses in this league. And I think that with the Ravens having that target on their back, Cleveland, obviously, I think got better. They're actually my 7 seed. I think they're finally going to get over that hump and make the playoffs once again. And overall, once Baltimore kind of gets into the groove of playing, I think that things are going to go swimmingly for them. Obviously, winning 15 straight games is no tough task, but I believe that with the roster and after taking a loss like they did against Tennessee and then to come in week 1 and potentially lose that game to the Browns, I think that's all the motivation you need to say, look, we were down against Tennessee. Now people don't believe in us because we lost to Cleveland and it's the same old, same old. Let's turn on the Jets and let's go win some football games. And I think that's what Baltimore is going to end up doing. Now, if that loss doesn't come in week 1 to Cleveland, I think it's going to come in week 14 to Cleveland. I just think Cleveland always gives the Ravens problems for some reason. I think it's the offense and the defense they run. It counters what the Ravens do. But overall, I think that, whether it's Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Cincinnati, the AFC North is going to be a much tougher division than it was last year, and that could contribute as well.
Yeah, a couple episodes ago when we did the draft recap for the AFC North, we were saying that this is probably the best draft for a division there were. There wasn't a draft that we didn't like. So it was very hard grading those drafts just because we liked every single team. So we agree with you there. You kind of brought up Yanda retiring and whatnot. So the question I have is, what do you think is the biggest weakness on this Ravens team heading into 2020?
I think for Baltimore, it's the veteran leadership at a few positions. I mentioned the wide receiver room. It's a bit young. What that means is the guys are just going to have to grow and step up. The Ravens didn't bring in a veteran. They let Seth Roberts go, someone who I think was very undervalued, had a pretty big drop in the Tennessee Titans game, and I think that really soured a lot of Ravens fans' opinions on him. But when he was on the field, it was very productive. I think Miles Boykin replaces that production, and Duvernay replaces that production. You look at the outside linebacker position, the Ravens brought back Pernell McPhee, but at the moment, excluding the undrafted free agents, you only have 4 guys right now on the roster who I think are going to be able to play meaningful snaps, and that is Matthew Judon, Tyus Bowser, Jalen Ferguson, and McPhee himself. You can look at the interior offensive line, and I guess the whole offensive line room in general. There are potentially 3 positions that are open on that interior. You could put Ben Bredesen, the fourth rounder out of Michigan, at left guard. You can put Matt Skura, who is coming off a torn ACL, MCL, PCL, and dislocated kneecap on the same play against the Los Angeles Rams. I mean, how is he going to come back from that injury? Is Ben Powers, the guy who learned for a year under Marshall Yanda, is he going to come in and, potentially be the next great guard for Baltimore? There are a lot of unknowns in the interior offensive line, but I think Baltimore has stacked up enough young talent where they can find three guys who can produce and can come in and give Lamar Jackson a good protection wall for the season. So if I had to pick a weakness, I mean, the roster up and down is pretty sound right now, but maybe adding a veteran at a few positions here wouldn't hurt.
Awesome. Cool. And then one final question for you that we like to do with all of our guests, and that is, hey, let's pretend we're a football player. It's late in the season. It's time to do my cleat, my cause. Do you have a cause or what type of cleat you'd want to wear?
Well, I think in the spirit of what's going on in the world right now, this might be a very popular answer, but I think all the COVID relief situations and funds that are going on right now, it's very important, especially to me, not only to bring sports back, but to get the world, relatively healthy and safe again. That's what I'm looking forward to. And, if I had my choice to donate to and to really make an impact for a cause, the way that the coronavirus has impacted the world, not just the United States, but the world in general, it's been nothing I could have imagined in my wildest dreams. It's just, everybody's inside, or at least the ones who are doing a good service to everybody. And it seems to be dividing the world in some instances. And I think that for me, being able to kind of bridge that gap and do everything I can to help, that's really my cause that I would contribute to. And I think that it's very important right now that everybody just stays safe and stays healthy, because that's ultimately what we can do to beat this virus, is do everything we can to stay inside, not spread the virus, and get back to how we were doing.
Awesome. I love it. And I totally agree with you and all of that. So yeah, great cause for sure. And let's hope that we got football this year. And I know that all of us and all of our listeners are hoping for that as well. All right, Kevin, that's all the questions I have for you today. So thanks for coming on. Everybody, you can find Kevin on Twitter at Oestreicher34, and then also the @LockedOnRavens. And then you can always find me at Justin Treese, and then Austin Cham33. So again, Kevin, we appreciate you coming on, and we'll talk again soon.
Beautiful. Thanks for having me. It was a fun chat.
You're welcome. All right, everybody. Tonight we've been talking football.